Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, 2022 SANS Survey, Securing Infrastructure Operations, sponsored by Cadre Information Security, Checkpoint, and Avanti. My name is Carol Auth of SANS, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speakers are Matt Bromley, SANS Analyst, Greg Francis, Assistant Vice President, Professional Services and Internal Operations at Cadre Information Security, and Kurt Johnson, Security Engineer, Checkpoint Software Technologies. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the Q&A window at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to our presenters.
Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. Thank you for letting me test my microphone really quick, and now we know it works. So happy to be here. And I'm looking forward to today's survey result as well. In particular, I'm looking forward to, whoops, we went back too far, one more. Okay, somehow we got to the end. Let's see if I can't go to the beginning. Give me 1 second. There we go. And I'm excited today to be talking about the 2020 survey we just conducted, which is securing infrastructure operations. Now, if you're joining us today, you've likely got some insight into what this means. Hopefully you read through, but this is a survey that was designed to explore really the cloud native side of things from an application and security monitoring, detection, prevention, response capabilities. I think this is a pretty timely survey because over the past, couple of years, and let's say we're about 2 years into this very interesting time, if you will, we've seen a pretty explosive growth in cloud native applications and adoption of cloud native services. And I think we're just going to continue to see the growth of this as time goes on. Interestingly enough, what we really wanted to explore in this survey was how does the security team keep up, or what types of data points, what vantage point, what insight, what benefits does the security team have as this, as this kind of explosion occurs, as this application growth happens. So what we focused on in this survey is analyzing data around the security team perspective and then analyzing the data accordingly. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this webcast. A quick note for everyone, this webcast is split into two parts. You're going to hear me for the first half of it, about the first half or so as I walk through some of our survey results. And then I'm going to invite Greg and Kurt to both join me on camera, and let me bring up their information really quick. I'm going to invite Greg and Kurt, Greg from Cadre and Kurt from Checkpoint, to join me on camera, and we're going to have a little bit of a back and forth for the second half of our webcast as we go and talk through some questions that have come in from the audience, as well as express our viewpoints on some of the high-level statistics and takeaways from the survey as well. So with that said, I'll go ahead and jump right into it. I just want to remind everyone, this survey or this webcast is reflected on a white paper. White paper is also released. I highly encourage that everyone go and check that out. The link for that paper just got dropped into the chat. So if you're on Zoom and you can see the chat and you're live, please go check that out. If you're watching a recording of this, the link to the white paper should be provided in the SANS registration page as well. Either way, highly encourage you to go check out the results for yourself, to go see some of the survey outcomes. And before I kind of get started on maybe the next part of this, I'm going to bring it up myself. And my main reason for that is I did put a little bit of a call to action, if you will, or some form of kind of how to use this in the survey. I think as we go through some of these various high-level topics, or we explore these ideas such as cloud native application integration, security response, so on and so forth, I think it's valuable for you all as our attendees, as our survey readers, as our audience, to also understand, how can you benefit from these results? Like, what should you be doing with this? Is it just Matt, Greg, and Kurt up here just kind of talking about things? Are we just kind of prophesizing based on what we saw? Or is there something I can actually get away from this data? And I think that there is. My call to action for folks as you kind of look through this is compare these results to what you see inside of your own environment. This can serve as, and we do this every year with multiple surveys that we publish. This is a great barometer for you. If you participated in the survey, you kind of see where you stand against others. If you did not participate in the survey, then there's a really good testament here of what we saw the types of demographics that broke down, as well as how your organization compares and stacks up next to it. Now, admittedly, when we get through this, and I'm going to point out little places during our webcast where I think there's a valuable point of comparison from a security perspective. There's other places where our information is useful, but I don't know if it necessarily changes your progress bar. For example, when we talk about kind of the distribution of cloud services or cloud applications, whether you're heavily in Azure versus AWS versus GCP versus a fourth provider, Greg, Kurt, and myself, we're not really going to kind of focus on which is the best one. That's not the discussion we're here for. Instead, I'd rather focus on the discussion of we are primarily in this particular cloud provider. Let's translate that to, and how does my security team stack up handling that? How do we deploy to that environment? How do we respond and detect inside of that environment? And that's really the barometer, I think, that you could get out of watching this webcast and where I want the comparisons to be. So as you work your way through the paper, the initial part's going to feel a little more like discovery, a little more like fact finding. That's to help us understand our demographics. The latter half, where we start to talk about security education, the differences between cloud and on-prem, detection confidence levels, response confidence levels, so on and so forth. That's where I want you to focus your team's capabilities on, because I think that's where you're going to see some of the best takeaways. And Greg and Kurt and myself are going to be covering that when we get to our panel discussion as well. So with that said, the survey breaks down into some high-level sections. We started out by just kind of focusing on securing infrastructure. That's kind of my takeaway from our survey. I'll pinpoint those in just a moment. And then the survey walks through a bunch of different points of kind of looking at how we would deploy into the cloud. So I looked at this as, what does it take to build or deploy into the cloud? How do we then secure those assets once they're in there? Hint, hint, we should be thinking about security way before we're deploying. And then we get into the looking ahead portion. As with any SANS survey, we always ask our attendees to give us some insight into what they're planning in the future. As I'm sure everyone can guess, more and more cloud is on the way. That should surprise none of us. And that was my first takeaway. My first big takeaway based on what I saw in the survey, as well as what I'm seeing out there in the real world or in talking with various organizations, security teams are often having trouble keeping up with the size of cloud footprints, with the size of that cloud infrastructure, with the size of applications and services as they're growing. I think that there's a combination of factors here. We'll explore these as we go through the presentation. But my biggest takeaway was confidence levels seem to be a little bit lower than they are on-prem. And I think that's partly due to just a lack of knowledge. I think it's also partly due to the rate of deployment, but more importantly, and perhaps the biggest point about it, is going to be the sheer difference in available evidence. And we'll talk about those as we continue exploring through these topics as well. My second high-level takeaway, again, keeping that security perspective on, and I'm combining this with my third. So look at the bottom two bullet points together with me here. Over half of our survey respondents have more than 40% of their operations in the cloud. So just think about how big your organization is. Take 40% of it, put it into the cloud, and ask your security team, all right, cool. Now I want you to differentiate between this 40% and that 60%. Quick FYI, next year after that, I'm expecting to see that 40% number continue to grow. And I would expect to see us, with some pretty heavy cloud-based operations. Translate that to security team training, security team knowledge. About 3/4 of our respondents admitted or said, yep, our security teams are trained on the differences between cloud and non-cloud security response. That's one of the best statistics I got out of this. One of the best statistics I got was, yes, we have gone through and identified the difference between cloud and non-cloud assets, as well as train the security team on how to respond to both. I'm loving that 3/4 breakdown, coupled with that 40% or more of operations in the cloud. I like that coverage. I really like that coverage. And here we go. This is where I pointed towards some of the other positives that came out of this. 85% of our respondents are going to be moving more assets to the cloud. There's that 40% number going on up. And this is one of our surprising takeaways, especially from a developer's perspective. A majority of the DevOps teams in our survey respondents came back and said that, and I say 73%. So again, about 3/4 or a little less are required to inform the security team of new risks upon deploying applications. This was, quite frankly, one of the most surprising statistics that came out of this. Not surprising because I wanted the number to be low, or I thought the number would be higher, but surprising more because I see and hear different from security teams out in the wild, out in working in various organizations. And I'm not saying every organization is this way. And if you're watching this now and you're saying to yourself, no, Matt, I've got great relationships with the DevOps team. I got great relationships and understand, everything that gets deployed. And we've got good insight into all those assets and we know what's out there. That is fantastic. I love hearing that close relationship exists. What I'm nervous though, and what I'm reading between the lines about this is I'm taking a look at the breaches that end up in the headlines these days. Of course, when we don't have a geopolitical conflict taking place, we see these headlines out there. We see the vulnerability of cloud assets, the vulnerability of platforms, the vulnerability of services, adversaries taking advantage of certain things. And then between the lines, I start to see that, well, if 73% of DevOps teams are required to inform the security team, there's that 27%. That's what I mean by using this survey as a barometer. Are you in that 73 or that 27? Let me go back a slide. Remember that 74% of security teams trained on the differences between cloud and non-cloud. That means there's 26% out there who are either unknown or no. So that's really what we want to make sure we're tackling as we approach these topics. Because I know some of you watching this right now, your game is locked down. You've got your environment set. You're aware, you've got great relationships, as assets are out there, your cloud environment, your cloud footprint is locked down. You're at the upper top 1% of our survey respondents. You're yes, 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 green lights all the way. But if I start to pull back on some of those variables, if I start to pull back on that response confidence, if I start to pull back on that telemetry source, if I start to pull back on that DevOps and DevSecOps integration, then we start to find areas for exploitation and areas for weaknesses inside of an environment. And those are the things that we want to make sure we're covering up. So with that said, we'll get into our first section, if you will, of the survey. This is kind of that first high-level data breakdown where we talk about building into the cloud. This is where we start to establish demographics for the survey from a cloud perspective. We do in the survey include geographic demographics as well. We don't call them out in the webcast here just because it's something that I would highly recommend going to the paper for. But I will say, our top 4 industries in this one included financial services, government, high technology. We had a myriad of organization sizes ranging from less than 1,000 employees to over 500,000 employees. And our roles included everything from analysts to incident responders to threat hunters. And I would say that believe it or not, the United States took the lion's share of the headquarter operations breakdown. No surprise there, but we did have a healthy global representation. But that is a physical geographic question. We're instead more focused on, well, what are you doing in the cloud, where perhaps the concept of a physical location is not as either clearly defined or is not really as relevant in that case. So we started out by saying, you know what? Rather than where's your headquarters, where in the, how much of your environment is do you have any in the cloud whatsoever? And this is a really good entry level question, if you will, a good way to see, does someone going to have some additional feedback for the rest of our questions here? And of course, 93% of our respondents did. Interestingly enough, someone walked into a cloud native asset survey and didn't have any in there. But that's not the point I want to harp on. If you've seen me talk about surveys before, my biggest gripe and my biggest pain point is that green in this one, that 3% of respondents who walked into this survey and said, I don't know, I'm unsure if we actually have assets in the cloud or not. I'm not really aware of whether that's there. That's that thread that I want to pull on a little bit further, because that's where I think adversaries are going to find some of their benefits as well. Let's continue pulling on this thread. This is once again our demographic building question. This is where we're starting to understand who do we see as some of the leading cloud providers out there. I don't think it comes as any surprise to anyone who's kind of been watching the internet for the past decade plus or so that AWS, Microsoft, and Google did take those kind of top 3 coveted positions. If you're wondering why I said top 3, but they're actually the top 4, you can see that Microsoft Azure and O365 or Microsoft 365 was its own separate category. We did this intentionally because we wanted to understand folks who have their infrastructure in the cloud, but do it from an office productivity perspective rather than a kind of, virtual machine, serverless containerization, so on and so forth perspective as well. Our respondents were, of course, able to select any that apply. But it was interesting to see that Microsoft take both of those second place positions, or that kind of combined second place, which is we see, pretty heavy operations in both Azure as well as O365. AWS took the top seat in this one. We did then start to see some representation, and I'm not going to call them lesser known. These are very reputable, well-known companies, but instead I'm going to say, watch the swing or the shift downward, where we get into IBM Cloud Computing, Alibaba, Oracle, Rackspace, so on and so forth. This is where I think we start to really see the preference of cloud providers when it comes to cloud deployments. This tells me one thing, seeing results like this. I know where the majority of the industry is these days. So as a responder, as a security person, that's where I'm going to start to focus my efforts when it comes to learning these technologies, learning what my organization has deployed. And if I'm reading a survey like this and I'm looking at two results side by side, and my security manager or my SOC manager said, yes, we have operations in the cloud, and yes, we use AWS, and I know those things for sure. If those are yeses, great. And I'm on the security team, even better, because now I want to know, all right, what types of assets do we have visibility into? What else can we see? And of course, don't forget that we likely also have some respondents who utilize multiple providers. This is something I encounter all the time. Putting on my security hat or keeping my security hat on, what does this mean for me? This means that if I've got business operations or infrastructure operations, some in AWS, some in Azure, some in GCP, O365 productivity, a few things out in Rackspace, whatever it may be, this means to me, I need to be well-versed on the technologies that we're utilizing and how to secure them, because that's my job. Does it make life a little bit harder the more platforms we're on? I would argue and say, yes, it does. But that's my first barometer. Is your security team aware of your cloud providers and how the assets are distributed? Quick example for anyone watching this here. I've been in, environments and worked in environments before where the dev environment is in one provider, prod is in another. And it's this really complex process of translating one over to the other, just because that's the way that they started to set themselves up. Security team, which one are you more interested in securing, dev or prod, or can it be both? This created a little bit of conflict and a little bit of tension for the team, because rather than ask one to move over, the security team ended up being that kind of middle entity that had to bridge the gap between the two and secure prod, secure the translation process from dev to prod, and then secure dev as well. It was not really a well-functioning mechanism for a security team, especially one who's charged with keeping that environment secure. And I would say, understand your distribution of assets and then work accordingly. Speaking of assets, speaking of how things are organized, we then started to dig a little bit deeper into, all right, what types of assets do you have out there? What types of things are deployed? And of course, we kind of hit upon the expected types of assets or the expected services or applications: web applications, office automation or office productivity, web applications. And then we get into, I think, kind of the, I would call them maybe the staple types of assets you see out there: file storage, databases, virtual machines, APIs, containers, so on and so forth. I think this is actually a pretty expected result. I didn't see anything in this data that made me really kind of, exclaim, say, oh, I didn't expect web applications to be a big deal. But when we get a little bit later on down the survey and we talk about what is being deployed in the future, you'll see some changes in these applications, or some changes in the order of these assets. I think that was an interesting takeaway, but we'll get to that as time goes on. But of course, I'm going to look at both sides of the coin. I'm going to look at both sides of the data here. If I go up to the top and I see things like web applications, office productivity suites, file storage, and databases, not only do I get to the most preferred or the most popular asset classes, I also get to the ones that have the most protections wrapped around them. I get to the ones where you're easily able to find the most security controls and the most integrations. So let me take my data down to the other side and see, all right, what do I have down at the other end that I might have organizational exposure to, but less readily available security? And we get into things like mobile applications, machine learning, functions as a service, CDNs, and we've got a mixed bag inside of the other group. But we can quickly see how, organizations aren't necessarily utilizing things like functions as a service as heavily as they are virtual machines or databases. But does it mean I have data inside of them? Potentially. Does it mean my security team needs to know about them? Absolutely. So the overall umbrella here is regardless of where the types of services you use falls, none of these, in my opinion, excludes the security team from knowledge or needing to know about what's going on here. And then we started to get a little bit deeper down the route of what do you have deployed and how was it put there? How was it built? How was it made there? Again, my security hat's still on. This is where I want the security team to understand the differences between connecting to a third-party application or an external application or service and simply opening up the data versus deploying our own custom developed application. Looking through this one a little bit further, you can see there's a pretty, and again, the question here is what percentage of your cloud usage is comprised of custom developed applications? Look how much representation there is in 40 to 100%. That's a pretty good representation. It is, if I do some really quick math here, about half, if not a little more than half of our representation, half of our survey pool here, saying, yes, at least 40%, 50% of my environment is custom developed applications. Folks, this changes what my security team is able to do, is capable of doing, because now I've got to ask the question, well, which one carries more risk? Connecting to a third party or downloading or using a third party application versus rolling our own. If we think back to the very recent Log4j vulnerability, I'm not going to go any further than saying that word into itself, but a custom developed library, or I should say a library that gets integrated with a lot of custom developed applications. Well, it was also integrated to a lot of third-party professionally built or bought off-the-shelf applications as well. Which one carries more security risk? Is my team aware of what's we've built internally, what's internet facing, what's not, and some of the risks behind it? And then I want you all to also ask yourself, if you did not participate in this survey, what is your environment like? What is what's the makeup inside of your environment when it comes to custom developed versus third party, off the shelf, or simply packaged and unrolled? I think this is perhaps, one of the most valuable questions you can ask about the types of things you're deploying out into the cloud. Because as I've mentioned, this is where you're going to have to ask yourself the question, what does my development process look like? How involved is my security team in that? We're going to transition now into the security side of things, because I'm only a few minutes away from bringing my other panelists on board to talk about some of the other observations from this. But when we get to the securing the cloud side of things, this is where we start to focus on how has the security team been trained to handle these different assets. So we threw the question out, and I talked about this earlier in our introduction here. Is your security team trained on the differences between cloud native and on-premises assets? 74% came back and said yes, but take a look at the breakdown of that 26%. Almost 15% came back and said, no, we have not done that training. But look at that 11.1%. Again, you'll find me really hanging out in the lower numbers or hanging out in the unknowns in a lot of these surveys, because I think that's where we see the most risk. And I think that's where we see the most adversarial opportunity as well. 11% came back and said, I just don't know. I'm not sure. That could be a good thing, right? There could be a whole massive training campaign that they're just not aware of, and that would move the needle a little more in the yes direction. But that also means that I'd say about 25%, 26% of our respondents, when asked about their security capabilities of cloud versus on-prem, came back and said either I don't know or just flat out no. A quarter of our respondents, it's a pretty sizable chunk. And I think this is perhaps the first time where I'd say, all right, we've got a problem that we need to solve here, because this is not a single digit number. This is the first statistic that I want to see really just get as close to 100 as we possibly can. I want to close that gap and say, no, we need to understand the difference between these types of assets and how to go through and protect and secure them as well. These gaps create three high-level categories that I know me and my panelists agree on here. We actually had some discussions about this as we were analyzing the survey results. This creates difficulties for a team. If you're in that no or unknown category, and I simply show up one day and I say, hey, remember last year we designed our posture around having assets on-prem and sitting behind choke points and having great network visibility? Yeah, well, now 40% of our environment is not in that anymore. Good luck making changes. That's a really difficult thing for a team to approach. This also creates opportunities for adversaries. Responding to an on-prem incident versus responding to a cloud incident is a little different in some senses. Obviously, we have the same objectives. We want to kick an adversary out, but securing a cloud portfolio is a little bit different than securing an on-prem portfolio. And then the other thing that you get out of this too, which is interestingly enough, a good point amongst my panelists and myself, was you also get this false sense of security. And going back to that discussion of that security posture built around certain types of assets, and then my org having other types of assets. Well, if we're checking all the boxes and doing everything that we're supposed to be doing, and we're not getting breached that we're aware of, and we are really happy with the way things are, we get this false sense of security that says, oh, my security posture is working. My security posture is working. And therefore, you know what? Everything's great. We don't really need to worry about anything at all. And then you find out you're in that 11 or 14% category of, I just don't know. And we don't want to have our security team in that category of they don't know what they don't know. We then went a step further on that topic and said, do you plan on enrolling or providing training to increase this knowledge? This is where the numbers go down a little bit. Again, this statistic to me ended up being somewhat of, I could explain more of the unknowns. I could see 27% of our respondents just not knowing their future training budget or knowing their future training opportunities. I would say the on-prem training versus cloud-based or hosted training has definitely inserted a wrench in the engine for that. But at least about 60% of our respondents came back and said, yes, we see the importance in here. We're going to invest in that in the future. For that 15% that came back and said no, flat out, I'm hoping that means you have training for other things that your team will benefit from. But I didn't explore that in this survey. I'm just going to leave that question there. And then we get into the types of telemetry that my teams are going to be using in order to secure these types of assets. So we split this question into two parts: platforms versus applications. And I really found this breakdown a little bit interesting when it comes to what types of telemetry were being used. Platforms wise, the web logs and authentication logs tend to be the highest source of evidence that security teams rely on in order to secure these particular things. And I found that to be actually somewhat expected, primarily because authentication logs are going to end up being that user-based access, that internal or that sanctioned access, if you will. It's perhaps the wrong word in today's geopolitical environment. Let's instead say authorized access. And then we also get into web logs, which I could see as kind of that external perspective. Who's accessing this way? Who's accessing that way? And then I can kind of work my way through that data. Admittedly, I would not necessarily want to focus my efforts on traffic flow analysis for an entire platform. Flip the other way to our application telemetry. And oddly enough, application logs and traffic flow end up being the two primary sources of evidence here. Traffic flow is, again, perhaps a better, if you will, perhaps a better metric to use at the application level because it's a little more controlled, a little more direct, a little more granular, as opposed to the overall platform perspective. But I think this is a really good balance of where I'd expect teams to be and what types of telemetry I'd expect them to be ingesting. And then last but not least, when it comes to the security perspective, apologies, I advanced the slide too fast there. When it gets down to the security perspective, this is where I talk about those confidence levels. Went out and asked, how confident are you in your ability to detect and respond to an incident in a cloud native asset? Interestingly enough, 47 plus 19, which gets us to about a little under, around 2/3 of our respondents came back and said, I'm, moderately to highly confident. I love that. But me, I'm going to hang out at the other side of the data. And I'm going to say that gives us a third of our survey respondents who came back and said, I'm either not confident, which is that, not low end, but that I need work end. But then take a look at the way that we broke down the other parts of this category here. And this is perhaps some of the best, insight. And this is one question where I want you, our viewers and readers, to compare your organization at, is we have visibility, but no confidence to respond to an incident. And I think that aligns with, we aren't trained properly on it. We don't have the right response playbooks, or we don't have the right response capabilities in place. Or someone that came back and said, we don't even have the insight to detect an incident. So not only am I not confident, I don't even have a way to detect across a cloud native asset. And I think that's like that right there is that not low, but that small category of we really need to get visibility up and into play. So if you find yourself in that bottom 3.6%, you know what types of telemetry other teams are using, integrate that, start to look at how your security team can benefit from that, and bring that into your environment as well. Now, last but not least, I've got just a few more things to talk about from a looking ahead perspective. This one shouldn't throw any curveballs coming through and saying to folks, are you planning on shifting more resources to the cloud? 82% came back and said yes. How soon? 85% of those respondents came back and said within the next 2 years. Some sooner, very few later. But the big takeaway for everyone here, especially those of you on the security team, if you've got someone in your operations or your management team who's going through this survey and they're answering yes, 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 soon, absolutely, more and more cloud, security folks, you got to be in those discussions. I want you at the front seat of that table, if not the driver's seat, passenger seat, if not the driver's seat, in helping steer the security aspect of those particular discussions. If you find yourself, and I'm shifting through the results here, if you find yourself in this bottom third where you're not confident or you don't know how to detect to respond, but your managers are saying, yes, we're deploying more to the cloud. Do y'all see that juxtaposition and that breaking gap of security capabilities right there? I would love every organization to say, yes, we're deploying more, and yes, security is helping us make it secure. But I feel like that's probably not the case. And I think our results in between the lines point out we've got some disparity there. That's where I want your security team to be sitting, because take a look at what's getting deployed in the future as well. I told you earlier when we talked about what's deployed now versus what's being deployed, you're going to see a shift, or you're going to see a rotation of the asset types. Internal web applications are the most popular services or applications, followed by virtual machines and databases. So those three categories leapfrogged over external web apps and ended up being, this is what's coming next. So security folks, before I bring on the rest of my panelists here, what does this mean for us from a security perspective? This means that I know what's coming down the line. This means that someone in my organization knows this is what we're looking at deploying next. This is the business process or transformation plan that we're looking at. Shifting this type of resource or this type of asset to the cloud. That's what we're looking at doing next. Security team, now you know. You know what's coming down the line. You know what types of things to look at. Start to ask questions. Who's our providers? What types of assets do we have? What are we planning? What do those transformation projects look like? How are we involved in securing those? My confidence level for detecting and responding to an incident in an external web application is very different from an internal, or a database, or a file storage, or a container, if you will. So let's break those down, see where the business is going, and readjust accordingly. All right. So there's a really quick breakdown of some of our results. As I mentioned in the beginning, there is the white paper available. We've posted the link into the chat a couple of times. I'd highly recommend checking that out if you get a chance, because there's some more breakdown, or there are more data and more analysis of data in there. And I highly recommend checking those out as well. But I'm now going to ask my other panelists to come back onto screen with me, or back on camera, if you will. And I'm going to go ahead and convert us into, let's see, they're on their way. So I'm going to go to, let's see if I can't go, gallery view doesn't really seem to be working for us. Maybe we'll just keep it this way. I'm going to hang it right here, team. I'm going to keep that Q&A window open for us. Kurt, Greg, do I have you both with me off mute? And I know you're on camera. Do I got you off mute too?
Well, I'm here, Kurt. Are you here?
Can you hear me?
Yes, they're both here. Excellent. I've got both of you. All right. Awesome.
No wire problems.
No wire problems. That's a good thing. Yeah, no, welcome to my microphone and the wire problems that I get to deal with. That was always a fun time. So with that said, thank you both for joining me. I went through and provided our attendees a little bit of a brief breakdown, I'd say, on my perspective on the survey. I think as we get towards the end of our panel discussion, gents, we'll probably have some additional takeaways and things like that. But I wanted to go through and talk about some of the questions we received, and some of the kind of different approaches and different statistics that came through. But before I do, I wanted to ask both of you in this case, overall, what do you think this survey means for our security teams? What do you think this, survey pinpointed and should make folks think about? What's your overall kind of takeaway from what you saw here? And Kurt, I'm going to go to you first, Greg, because you're going to then answer the first question afterwards.
Sure. Well, whenever I see surveys like this, plus the results, I kind of like to see that things line up. So when you're presenting the types of monitoring tools that they're using, that it shows the inverse that's correlative. One that I just noticed while we were going through this the second time here is the Office applications, how the Office and automation that people have deployed between Microsoft and G Suite, plus the ones that they're looking to deploy in the future on the other slides, looks like it adds up to 100%, which is correlating the data inside the survey. Overall, I mean, I was worried that you get into like a confirmation bias where Gartner says, hey, everyone's going to be deploying X percentage of cloud, so therefore I have to say I'm doing that. I believe it matches up. Yeah. You don't want to be in that situation, but I think the breadth of the respondents shows that, yeah, it correlates with across industries, certainly across what my customer base sees. And I think Greg may be able to add a little bit to that, but it has good information, good takeaways, and some maybe some bad implications for the state of affairs right now.
All right, Greg, what do you think?
Well, I think Kurt makes some good points. I sort of had two reactions. One, I was good, and one where there's some work. I was actually pleased to see that the respondents actually seem to be better positioned than sometimes the word of mouth suggests.
Yep.
That there was a lot of good stuff in there, and makes me think that we pay attention to the incidents that happen, but we don't pay attention to ones that don't. So people out there are doing a good job, and that's great to hear. But the other side of it is that we saw there at the end, it's not going to stop. It's not like we got there and now we're all set. This is a wave that is rolling over the shore for years to come. And that's more and more that's going to be thrown at the security team, where security teams have segregation of duties. That's going to involve shifting resources to the cloud specific security resources. So there's a lot that's going to have to be done still. And I think it shows up in the survey really well.
Yeah, that was, I think I'll have to agree with both of you. I think, that was perhaps one of the most interesting takeaways is working with orgs. And I know you both spend plenty of time with multiple organizations, as well as obviously your respective employers as well. But the amount of times you spend with people, it almost feels like, I was expecting this survey to come out kind of like that lost in the woods approach. Lots of folks to come out and be like, I have no idea, right? I don't know. Are we trained on cloud? I'm not really too sure. And then I kept looking to these results and I'm like, wow, this is like 2/3 of everyone is like moderately or highly confident. This is great. Like I hope, and I say this with true sincerity, I hope that the results will kind of show through in adversary success rates, if that makes sense. I want to see like publicly less cloud native breaches or cloud-based attacks take place, because teams are just like, no, we're all set, right? We're prepared for this. We're ready to go. And I really like that viewpoint. So I agree with both of you on this one here. All right, well, Greg, I've got a question that's come in that I'm going to ask you first on this one. One thing that I did not talk about that much in my kind of monologue of the survey was that deployment perspective. I had one slide where I talked about the DevOps team notifying the security team of an application out there. 73% of our respondents indicated that the deployment of a new app or service required the notification of the security team. Greg, I'm gonna come to you first. Does that type of integration, first off, are you seeing that out there, number one? And number two, does that surprise you at all? I mean, that's almost 3/4 of our respondent base here are saying, yeah, DevOps and security are tightly woven together.
That was one of the things that I've sort of been mulling in my head, because my initial reaction was that seems high to what I'm seeing out there. It feels like I'm constantly hearing from security people about folks in the organization that aren't keeping them in the loop, that processes and policies aren't being followed. Not that there aren't organizations that do have robust things in place, but I hear that a lot. And I think one of the things that we may be actually seeing in there is sort of a gap space we didn't get to, is that there may be a number of organizations that have a notification policy and that's being followed, but maybe the security team isn't getting the richness of information, or maybe they aren't built into the process. So they're getting notified, but then they're sending solutions after something's moved to production. There's a lot of things that may account for that discrepancy there. That said, I'd also like to be completely wrong about that. And in fact, everybody in that 70% is working seamlessly together.
Yeah. Kurt, what do you think about that 73%? Do you think that's a little high based on what you're hearing and seeing, or does that actually kind of align with where you think things are going?
I actually was just talking to a customer this morning. It's not a segue or anything. It literally an hour ago that said, yeah, we get a notification that they turn a new server on, but then we got to go take care of it ourselves and make sure that it's not open to the internet. So I can't agree if that's the rubric that it's saying, yep, we get a notification. Well, okay, then that doesn't surprise me. But initially, before this conversation this morning, it's like, man, yeah, I usually see customers that are more in the infancy and they have nothing, no notifications going.
Yeah. I agree. I'm kind of in that boat, and I want to be in the same position as both of you, which is, I hope I'm wrong. I hope that I am pleasantly surprised by these numbers, and I hope they stay that way. In fact, if they go up, if we do the survey again and those numbers go up, I'll be even happier next time to be here saying I was wrong, right? I was 100% wrong. And either that, or we have at SANS developed the most interesting survey curation process, in which case we get the edge of the industry that, has that representation. All right. So gents, it opens up an interesting discussion. And I kind of like, Greg, how you focused or how you, position this as the security team may get a notification, right? Admittedly, our question did not ask what type of notification, like how involved are you? And I think there's an interesting thing to expand upon there. But I think the flip side of this, whether you're in the know or unknown category, or even if you're in that 73%, I don't think this eliminates shadow cloud as a problem. And let's go ahead and explore between the both of you. Kurt, you just wrapped up that question. So Greg, I'll come back to you and then I'll kind of, hopscotch between you guys. But Greg, let's start out with this concept of shadow cloud. First off, is it a problem? I think our survey results say so, but let me get your take, number one. Number two, how is it different from shadow IT, especially based on what we're seeing in some of these results here?
Well, I think, again, we see it in the results, and I don't think anyone listening now is at all surprised by the idea that there are organizations or entities and individuals in their organization that are utilizing cloud without the security team or even IT being aware of it. I think that's no surprise at all. On the other hand, we've been dealing with these, shadow problems for decades. Someone's got the money, they got the credit card, they buy the computer. So the real question is what you get to at the end there, Matt, and that is this different? And if so, how? I think one key piece is, we've gotten to be really, really good at discoverability. When it comes to our on-prem infrastructure. You can't just plug something into the network anymore. We've put those solutions in place. In the cloud, sure, if something shows up in my tenancy, I'm going to see it. But what if someone's off doing something else in their tenancy, and that's creating a pathway either into my physical infrastructure or into other cloud-based parts of my infrastructure. So I do think that we're facing some unique challenges here. And, I think, one thing we really didn't talk about is that in the survey is that means our solutions in some ways have to be more comprehensive. Again, with our on-prem, it was all about the network, right? Maybe not all, but that was so core to everything. And in the cloud, we've got to look and see what is that, what are the solutions that give us that same sense of comfort that we know what's going on. And I think that's going to be where some of the real answers lie.
Yeah. Kurt, what do you think? Shadow Cloud versus Shadow IT. New problem or same old, same old?
Same old problem, just on steroids. The Shadow IT, Shadow Cloud is Shadow IT that provides you everything. You have your own data center in there. You're not just using box for your storage or an email application or platform. It's providing everything for you to run a business in.
Yep.
Yeah, agreed. And I think Greg, you said it first, and then Kurt, I think you kind of subtly answered this as well, subtly added this as well. Anyone with a credit card, before could just go buy a laptop, buy a system or whatever, buy a USB drive, and next thing you know, I've got something of value, be it data, be it a separate asset or a separate physical thing, has now entered the environment. And I think, Shadow Cloud creates that same issue. Interesting though, I'm curious to get both of your thoughts on this. Is it easier? Not maybe easier is the wrong term, but I would say let's go the other route, right? Shadow IT, I go get a separate system, I connect it to the network, I'm transferring data back and forth because I don't like the restrictions or whatever it is. And now I've got this physical thing with data on it by transferring it through various kind of traceable means, if you will. And what I mean by that is forensically, we can go and examine that, right? I think it brings us into that detection and response realm of, hey, I see a USB drive plugged in, or I see a network cable show up. I have a physical switch that confirms that. I see MAC addresses and IPs. I get all this information that I can use to say this thing should not be here, right? Let's go to the cloud. I get a credit card and I spin up a completely new instance that no one has any awareness of whatsoever. And then I simply go into my permissions and I say, yes, this app is allowed to talk to that app. Quick question. Does that create less artifacts for us? Does that make it a little harder to trace, do you think? Or is it just different artifacts? And I'll bring up kind of the telemetry slide we had earlier here. Not because I want you guys to perform an examination of the telemetry, but I want our attendees to think about this types of telemetry as we kind of talk about this question. Do I get less here if I'm looking at kind of stuff leaving the environment or shadow assets connecting to things, or do I get, kind of the same? To me, it feels like less, but what do you guys think? Kurt?
Yeah, I definitely, at least my comfort level when it's something physically graspable, that you understand more of the risk, and can know what you were just saying, all of this information coming in because there is a physical device. It's part of that shadow IT though. If somebody's doing it without you noticing, then yeah, it's always going to happen. You're never going to understand what the risks are. Fair point.
Greg, anything to add?
And no, I agree, completely with Kurt. I do think that some of it though, is I do wonder about the maturity thing. We see organizations that, have matured their on-prem. They've got a good SIM solution. They're looking through, these things. And it's a long way from where you had, each sysadmin looking at their own logs type situation. And I'm not sure that we have comparable security in our cloud teams and at all organizations.
Yeah, you guys bring up an interesting point, which is based on the survey that we saw. Kurt, I'm gonna come back to you because you brought up kind of that you mentioned the word comfort. I'm gonna translate that to confidence. And there's our 22% of our respondents came back and said, regarding detection and response capability, I'm going to try and find it in the slides here really quick to bring up for our attendees. I think that's going to be maybe somewhere here. There we go. 22% coming back with that, no confidence level, in a combination between the 18.2 and the 3.6 in there. Is that something we should be worried about? Do you think? We're talking shadow IT. We're talking it's a bigger problem on steroids. We're talking it's much easier, or at least it's as easy to activate, if not easier than Shadow IT, Shadow Cloud. What do you think? Do you think this 22% creates a gap? Is this a problem?
I was kind of shocked that the inverse, that it was people were more confident. It's a problem that we've always got that moving target. There's always going to be new resources popping up that no one understands. It's that knowledge gap. I think the understanding of it produces more confidence in how to secure it. Trying to think of some more specific examples in my interactions with customers that confirm these statistics. So
yeah, if I can add to that, Matt, one of the things that, the sort of people who want to be in our business, a good security person is not someone who is going to be, you don't want a cocky security person, right? You want someone who questions, have I checked all the boxes? Have I looked everywhere? So I actually felt pretty good about seeing that that the moderately confident blew away highly confident, because those are the people I want. I want the ones who say, I feel pretty good about where we are, but I'm alert, I'm vigilant, because I'm sure there's something I'm missing. Those are great security people.
Yeah, I kind of want to see the highly confident security stack. I want to see I want to see what that setup looks like. And I'm not throwing shade whatsoever. I want to see the stack and visibility that pushes that high confident level behind it. So agreed on that one. Guys, let's go ahead.
Also, are the highly confident ones answered from people that only have 10% deployed in the cloud? I would be curious about that.
That's the other thing. That is that's one cross tabulation actually that would be very interested in looking at. Perhaps I should probably maybe retroactively look through that one. But yeah, that's a valid valid viewpoint as well. Is where does your confidence level stand compared to how much of your environment is in the cloud? Because if you came back and you said, oh yeah, we started to deploy in the cloud in January 2022, I'm confident because we got 3 things out there. Versus a team who has been in the cloud for, 7, 8, 9 years and is like, yeah, we were there when AWS was just S3 and we're still only moderately confident. So I think there's a good assessment there. The other thing that I'd say we didn't cross tab here, but the other thing that I thought of as I was working my way through this on this topic, and then I want to switch gears to another question, is also how the confidence level can be impacted by where your platform is located.
Definitely.
You could be highly confident in, and I'm hypothesizing here, you could be highly confident in your AWS side of things, but then you discover that your dev team's got some GCP stuff going on, and that brings down, right, your confidence. So you get that overall average of, yeah, if it was focused and targeted, I would be very confident, but because it's spread, and I think the other thing this question does not necessarily answer, which is okay, is how confident is your team at detecting incidents and responding to incidents? Like, are you a good IR team who's just spread across a lot of providers? Or are you an IR team who's struggling even with the lowest representation? So I think there's, some valuable crosstabs. Maybe next time we run this survey, there's some interesting things we can extrapolate on a little further. Let's switch gears really quick. We did have a question come in, or another question come in from the audience. And I'm going to bring up the slide to kind of back this up here. And it talks about percentage of cloud usage comprised of custom developed applications. We had someone come in who said, is there any chance that respondents interpreted custom developed to include reporting or visualization solutions like Power BI? Greg, I'll come to you first to see if you've got some insight on this. Feel free to take, maybe the security side or the application side on either one, but I know you did want to attack this question, for our attendees. Yeah.
And I mean, as far as the direct question, I presume somebody could interpret it that way. I don't know what individuals did. But I do think that one of the things that cloud is doing is it is putting more robust tools in the hands of a wider range of the employees in our organizations. I mean, what you can do with stuff that's available, whether it's something like Power BI or really a lot of things you can just go get from marketplaces, really changes the dynamics in a lot of way. And so I think that we would have to presume on the one hand that yes, that these custom applications may not be some giant inventory management system that goes across my entire organization, but I'm not sure that it reduces our overall risk profile, just changes it, because I think that we're bringing in a lot more factors with that.
Yeah. Valid point. Kurt, anything to add on that one?
No, I think Greg stated it fairly well, that we can't be in the mind of the surveyor, but there's definitely the slide presents an overall mix of those custom developed applications.
Yep. Yeah, fair point. Fair point about that. Now, two other questions, and maybe these are a little bit forward thinking as well. The first one I think is an interesting one because I talked a little bit during this, and I've talked during our panel about posturing and everything as well. Does this growing trend towards cloud, and let's just say this entire survey upticks toward more cloud usage at an already high level, it's upticking towards more. Does this mean that we need to abandon traditional security means and move towards platform native security tools? And I'm going to quantify that and say that the caveat to this question for our attendees watching here, because I'm going to give both Kurt and Greg a chance to discuss whether we need to kind of change our approaches, if you will, right? But the caveat to this is, as Greg pointed out earlier, what percentage of your environment is in that cloud realm? If you're in, and there's an easy answer to this, which is if you're in 10% cloud, but you're looking at cloud native tools and whatnot, maybe you're trying to get ahead of the curve, which nothing wrong with that. Flip side is if you're at 80, 40, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90% cloud, and you're still like, well, is this an endpoint or not? There might be, you might have a quick catch up or quick growth to do, but I'll throw it to you both. Kurt, I'll come to you first, and then Greg, I'm going to ask you to finish up with that one. But, okay, so my environment is 40% cloud, 50% cloud. Do I kind of change the way we do things? Do I augment? Do I bolt on? If I'm 50% or more, Kurt, am I cloud first and then on-prem second? I mean, how does this break down?
Yeah, I don't think 50% is cloud first. I mean, those born in the cloud individuals, that 1.7% or who's sitting at 100%.
Yeah,
I assume is a born in the cloud or a very small business startup. I think the methodologies, I mean, the tools and the methods of how we do security always change and adjust with that moving target, the landscape, the new threats that come out. But I don't think the principles, they don't change. So, yeah. I mean, you always got layered security. Now you've just, like with perimeter, previously when it was all on network, you had that perimeter gateway. Now you've got more perimeters that you have to worry about. Data, storage, authentication, and now compute. They're all messaging perimeters. They're all facets of things we have to know. Hopefully the knowledge gap decreases and we understand that, so that we can take either custom tools to get visualization and put security around it, or guardrails using third parties to hopefully amass a view around all your clouds, so that, yeah, as you get to the multi-cloud deployments of, if you're just one application or a specific set of applications in AWS and you're using Azure for disaster recovery, those are probably more usable with native tools. Like, yeah, you use your native tools for AWS, you use the native tools for Azure. As you get, I think, deploying more into containers and functions as a service, where it becomes a little ubiquitous, wherever my wherever it's running, doesn't matter. Now you need something that can cover it all.
Fair point. Greg, what do you got to add?
I was actually, when Kurt got going, I was going to ask him to address the multi-cloud, and I think he covered that really well. But because I do think that's an important transition point in that cloud adoption.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, with that said, I didn't realize, I just took a look down and we are actually right at time. Kurt and Greg, guys, I want to give both of you about 30 seconds or so. If you want to take a chance to just kind of briefly describe, first off, thank you for your involvement in the survey. Thank you for kind of, helping us bring this content together. But if you want to both take about 30 seconds or so, quickly talk about what it is that you do, who you're representing. And then Carol, I'll hand it over to you to bring us home afterwards. But thank you both very much for joining me on my panel. The next minute is split between you two. And then Carol, I'll let you finish us out from there. But thank you to our attendees for joining as well. It's always a pleasure having you with us. And I hope you found as much value in the survey as we did. Kurt, only because you're on my screen right next to me, I'm going to let you go. Greg, you're right afterwards. Carol, then it's you.
You got it. Yeah. Checkpoint Software Security. It's been in the security business for 29 years. And we've seen the cloud adoptions and made acquisitions and things about that around that to help customers as a whole, whether it's just a specific application, whether it's that multi-cloud view. We're that platform approach that if you need something, let us know.
And Cadre Information Security, we've also been in the business for over 20 years, a solutions provider around specifically cybersecurity. It's all we do. Work with great people like Kurt at who are producing solutions. We try to play an advisor role, help organizations to figure out the correct solution for their infrastructure, circumstance, customers, et cetera.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. Carol, over to you to take us home.
All right. Thank you so much, Matt, Greg, and Kurt for your great presentation, and to Cadre Information Security, Checkpoint, and Avanti for sponsoring this webcast, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.